Hey guys, I just want to bring up an opportunity for resource investors. If you want to rub elbows with the big wigs and talk to companies directly that are handpicked by Rick Rule, well, you got to be in Boca Raton from July 7th to 11th for the Rick Rule Symposium. The event has become a premier event in the mining space, and they're going to have some pretty big speakers like Robert Friedland, Sean Rusin, and the great Rick Rule. And also, we're going to be there. You can meet the Deep Dive team in person. So if you're interested in rubbing elbow with some of the biggest heavy hitters in junior mining, check out the link below. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Rob McLeod from Nations Royalty. Nations Royalty is a new issuer here in Canada that is majority owned by the Nisga'a tribe. The company currently has 5 main royalty projects, one of which is producing, but the big gem here appears to be the KSM project, which has total reserves of 47 million ounces of gold and over 7 million pounds of copper. And that's just the reserves. The company's plan is to work with Indigenous communities who are looking to crystallize some of the royalties that they have access to and be a part of a bigger picture that could one day rival the likes of Franco-Nevada. It sounds crazy to say something like that, but when you look at the royalties that they're starting off with, if they're able to go and add similar royalties, the path is there. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me on.
So let's start off with Nations Royalty, a new issuer here in Canada. What can you tell us about the company?
Sure. So your viewers will have never seen anything like Nations Royalty out there. We're specializing in the mining royalty space, in a component of the industry that's been, the crown jewel of the entire mining space. It's been these royalty companies. Franco-Nevada and Wheaton Precious Metals are two of the 3 largest mining companies in the whole country, and they don't have any operations. The investors love these type of companies because you get all the exposure to the upside in commodities with a lot less risk than the operating mining companies, where there's lots of different things to go wrong rather. They've been so successful that it's very difficult for new royalty startups, of which there's been quite a few, that have a real challenge in terms of growth, because there just aren't many royalties out there to be acquired, whether it's by the big 3 or any of the upstarts. The last untapped royalty space in Canada are Indigenous royalties. You see, every new mine that has gone into production in the past 30 years in the country has only done so with consultation with Indigenous people. So most of these new mines, virtually all of them, have impact benefit agreements. And most of those benefit agreements have economic components to them, such as royalties or streams, or other sort of revenue components. Within our proprietary database at Nations Royalty, we have over 150 of these Indigenous-owned royalties. Now, we were founded by a nation in the Golden Triangle region of British Columbia, that many of your viewers that have followed the mining space, that's an area, that's where I'm from, was where I grew up. And it is home to some of the biggest and richest mineral deposits, whether it's for base or precious metals, in the world. This founding First Nation, they're called the Nisga'a, and they have 5 royalties on mines and advanced projects. Nations Royalty is taking those 5 royalties and putting them into a public vehicle. The net asset value of these royalties are over $200 million US, and it is a wonderful starting set of royalties to build this company off of. But our vision is that First Nations across Canada will join us by vending in their royalties and revenue streams for shares in this company, which should allow us to have really unprecedented growth in the royalty space. So that's basically the long and the short of it. We're building what our vision will be is to be a top 5 royalty company in Canada through Indigenous owned royalties.
So is it safe to assume that at this stage, the majority of the company is owned by First Nations?
The vast majority. And on listing, Nishka will own 76% of the stock. The other really important founding partner should be also no stranger to your viewers is Frank Justra. Frank and Nishka leadership met a couple of years ago. Frank told the story about Wheaton Precious Metals. He was a founder of, started out as Wheaton River Minerals. They spun out Silver Wheaton. They introduced the concept of streaming. And it's that experience and in the mining sector and the royalty space that will help guide Nations Royalty, and Frank will be a very large shareholder as well of this company moving forward.
So something you mentioned is the net asset value of these royalties. Now, when I think of a royalty, I think it's just a stream of cash flows on a forward-looking basis. But obviously, you're going to discount those. You've seen some sort of discount rate to come to some sort of asset value. How would you describe net asset value for our retail owners retail investors that hear of the concept of net asset value, and you guys are subscribing pretty large values to these royalties. How effectively are those calculated?
So these royalties, say such as Nishka has one on the first cash flowing royalty that they have, and there's a second one that's coming online. But the first one is from the Bruce Jack mine, one of the largest underground gold mines in Canada. And so they get a cash payment annually from that operation. The value that we have calculated the net for the net asset value is taking the outlook for future production from the Bruce Jack mine that comes from the company's both technical reports and annual production outlook, and then discounting all of those future payments at either 5% for precious metals or 8% for base metals to today. Then additionally, we take the outlook for the next 5 years worth of G&A and then deduct that as well as applying a discount to come up with a net asset value. Now, the interesting thing about the royalty space is that you have quite a range, and bigger is certainly better when it comes to royalty companies. But we are on listing. We're discounting the net asset value for Nishka's portfolio to a 0.41 PNAV. So if you look at the big 3 royalty companies, they're trading at pretty close to a double PNAV. If you look at a Cisco, and they're trading over 1 in many of the other bigger royalty companies. So on listing, we are going to give investors the opportunity to get in at a very good value. As we will acquire additional Indigenous royalties, we believe that PNAV ratio will continue to increase. The peer groups of both precious metal and diversified royalty producers, on average for the mid-sized to small royalty companies, trade at around a 0.8 PNAV. So we're listing at what we believe will be a very good ratio for investors to get in early in this company.
If you guys approached the First Nations who had some sort of financial arrangement in place, some sort of royalty structure, what's in it for them? Why would they want to agree to vend in their financial consideration towards a mining project into Nations Royalty?
So, that's a really good question. And in the case of Nishka, The main reason why they wanted to do this is to diversify. You see, in British Columbia and many jurisdictions across Canada, First Nations actually have two revenue streams. In addition to the royalties that they get from the mining companies, they also typically will have arrangements with the provincial and federal governments on sharing of mineral taxes. And so Nishka, for example, from the Bruce Jack mine, would get two checks every year. And so what they can do by vending in their shares, and this is for First Nations across and Indigenous groups across Canada, you vend in those the royalty in for shares today. You can crystallize all of that value and de-risk anything that can go wrong either with the mine or on the macro side. Mining is inherently risky. And certainly it would, Nishka's great that they have 5 royalties. Many First Nations across Canada only have 1. And so by vending the royalty in, you're de-risking any stop-starts that mine might have, any ups and downs in the commodity prices, but they also still maintain that mineral tax sharing revenue stream. And so we believe that it's a highly compelling opportunity for other First Nations to lower their the risk of the royalties, say particularly if it's just one that they hold, by crystallizing all of that value today. Now, nations royalty might not be a good fit for many nations that have really nice cash flowing royalties out there, but where we want to get to is to the multiples of PNAV as well that the larger royalty companies enjoy. And that's another really, really compelling reason that they can get multiples to that PNAV by vending in the royalties into a royalty company.
So from looking at your investor deck, the Bruce Jack, KSM, Premier, and Red Mountain royalties are what's referred to as MTRs, which is a little fairly different from NSRs, as I understand it. Can you walk us through the differences between MTRs and NSRs?
Sure. Well, and this is actually, it's a new class of royalty that is quite common with First Nation benefit agreements. So an NSR is a top line royalty company in royalty speak. And so, it doesn't matter if your mine's making money or not, you are going to get a percentage of that annual production. An NPI is a bottom line that it's net profit interest royalty that is tied to how much money you make. An MTR, which stands for a mineral tax royalty, it is somewhere in between. So it is a markup on the mineral taxes that an operation would pay. And mineral taxes, and it is in our on our investor presentation. Your viewers can go to the website to see how it's calculated, but you take a percentage that comes from the gross revenue and you take a percentage from the net revenue, and these MTRs have a percentage overriding on that. So say, for example, if there was a 30% MTR on a mine that paid $1 million in mineral taxes, there would be a $300,000 payment that would go to the nation.
Okay. I'm relatively, although I've been investing in mining for 3 or 4 years, I'm still constantly learning. So if I'm understanding this correctly, is part of the tax that goes to the government first earmarked to go to the First Nations community?
So these are negotiated on a case-by-case basis. So mineral taxes are split between the federal government, the provincial government, and then either First Nations or local communities if the mine falls, say, within the city or limits of a community. And so it could, say, be a third each. And additionally, there are mines where there's overlapping territory from different First Nations. And, Bruce Jack and KSM are actually examples of that, where the Tahltan Nation to the north and the Nisga'a Nation to the south the dividing line between the two traditional territories cuts through the properties. And so there's an example where those mineral taxes would be split.
So my understanding right now is that you are the interim CEO. You're not designed to be here in the long run. What is it you guys are looking for right now in the perfect CEO for Nations Royalty?
So a pillar to this company is the capacity building component for Indigenous people to be part of capital markets. Steve, if you've gone to any of the conferences such as Beaver Creek or PDAC, you might see some Indigenous people that are there, but very few, if any, are either directors or in the C-suite. And so I grew up in Nisga'a traditional territory in the mining community of Stewart, BC, but I am a white man. The leader for this company leadership at all levels should be Indigenous and will be Indigenous. And so we are already, and we'll have some upcoming news here for additional young Indigenous mining entrepreneurs that are joining our team from First Nations from all across Canada. Whether it's one of these people that are joining have joined our team already, or somebody new that we bring in, this company needs to be Indigenous led. A really important component to what we call in Canada economic reconciliation is having Indigenous people in these business leadership positions, and they're simply not there. Like there's 2,000 junior mining companies out there. I don't know of any Indigenous CEOs that lead any of these companies, despite Canada having 6% of the population being Indigenous. So this capacity building component, and this is something that Frank Juster has been adamant about, is that we help build up Indigenous people to be part of the capital markets that the white guys like me have been enjoying our whole careers. So that's the key. Then obviously have to be qualified in the business space to be interim CEO.
High level, I know that there's the royalty plan, but there's also big problems with just junior mining companies in general being able to appropriately handle Indigenous relations. We see it all the time that a company has a project and for whatever reason, they're not able to come to terms with the Indigenous community, and all of a sudden their project basically goes to zero. You think that there's an opportunity there with the right management team that may be able to almost, and I know that this is designed to be a royalty structure, but get involved a little bit earlier on with some of these scenarios to try to help sort of navigate that between the two parties?
Certainly, it could be a huge component. I think this is where the industry is going in Canada, and righteously so. And I believe we will have a much healthier mining industry if we have First Nations that have more skin in the game, that First Nations have an equity ownership, that they're not just out driving dump trucks around and being catered to. And the cash flowing royalties, the economic components are really important. But to be able to have a meaningful stake, like Nisga's royalties, the value on listing is going to be over $100 million Canadian. That's really, really significant. If that grows into multiples of that, and we believe it will, it is an example to First Nations about the value and the torque that the equity component to these companies can have. And so I think on whether it's on the capacity building side or more skin in the game, then absolutely, maybe you can look at some of these challenge projects, of which there are, a few in Canada that might have a new lease on life if you have alignment between the First Nations and the leaderships of the mining committee and mining companies, and that equity component, I think will be really important for many of those projects going forward.
So if I'm a potential investor or an investor in the company, what am I looking at for the remainder of 2024? Is there sort of maybe some timelines or milestones I should be watching out for? How do I evaluate this company if I think that this sounds like a good idea and I want to invest?
So, there's many reasons, especially early on, to invest in Nations Royalty. One is that we are launching at quite a discounted net asset value, and we believe that we should quickly retrade up because it's an opportunity certainly for retail investors. It's a little bit more of a challenge for institutional investors, that this is not going to be a very liquid stock. Nishka have no intention of selling their shares for a while. Any of the founders of the company as well too. We all have our shares are escrowed for 3 years. So our float is going to be less than 10% of the company. So, it should be if you're long and you're retail, it should be a good investment. But in terms of the catalyst, what's going to be absolutely key is the proof of concept here, which are additional royalty transactions. The corporate development side of Nations Royalty is today exceptionally active. We want to transact quickly with First Nations in a variety of different commodities across Canada as soon as possible. Our priorities are cash flowing royalties. Our highest priorities are the precious metal and energy metal space. But since we've announced, what we've been blown away with is that First Nations across Canada have been reaching out to us to potentially be part of this. And it includes renewable energy, oil and gas space, industrial commodities. With our diversified approach, is that if there is an accretive transaction for the company to make on a project where First Nations have consulted to the development or operation of that project, we will absolutely look at them. Maybe thermal coal is one that might not be in, but otherwise there is literally hundreds of opportunities for us to grow. Within our proprietary database alone, just on the mining side, there's 150 royalties, and we have a priority target list that we are actively working on. So for your investors will be to see that growth. And the size of many of these royalties, Steve, would blow your mind. It's there is a path for a very large royalty company here to emerge quite quickly.
All right, well, Rob, thanks for hopping on here. I look forward to seeing what you guys are able to do in the coming quarters. And hopefully as there's more updates and you guys start to bring on your new management team, we can continue to have you guys on here and talk about the story.
Yeah, we'll look forward to you sharing our growth, particularly over the next few quarters here. We're really excited with where we're going to take Nations Royalty.
Thanks, Rob. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.